Maybe under Matt Parkinson.
Maybe under Matt Parkinson, okay. That's all I can see, yeah. Better. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Is this it, Barry? Right, tax abatement process? Did it? All right.
Just scroll and just push.
I think we just-
Yep. Okay, cool.
Here's a clicker, it's working. If you want to- Yeah, the clicker's working. So.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. I'll start off my comments by saying some of the designating bodies are for abatements, and some of the designating bodies are against the abatements, and we're for the designating bodies. So it's a convenient way of saying we give great deference to local control. So if we get calls from the Hancock County Council saying, hey, what do we do about this abatement? We'll say, hey, this is your bailiwick, this is your decision. We provide guidance, we provide rules, legislation. We don't provide legislation, but we interpret that. We provide training, but at the end of the day, it's ultimately going to be your decision on an abatement. And so, having said that, we'll go through, we're doing basically about a 3-hour presentation condensed down to about 30 minutes. So we're going to rush through a lot of things. I'm not going to bore you and read a lot of the Indiana Code citations because I do want to leave time for questions and answers. I do also want to offer, we have on our staff one person in particular who's an abatement specialist, and we have gone into counties and presented this presentation basically to the county council, bring in the auditor, the assessor, economic development folks, if you have town or city county council people, basically getting everybody in one room to hear it all at the same time. And we're certainly more than willing to come to your town or your county and present this information at a future date if you'd like to. So having said that, we're going to talk about some basic definitions, how the taxpayer and the designating body each establish an abatement, the taxpayer claim, how the taxpayer claims the abatement or the deduction, how the officials review the deduction, common problems, and then problem solving and what you can do about it. We will frequently reference the Indiana Code, and the Indiana Code, for a brief civics lesson, is what the General Assembly passes. And a lot of times the General Assembly in their legislation that they pass will give the agency, in this case the state agency, the DLGF, enabling legislation to pass or promulgate rules, in which you would find in the Indiana Administrative Code. And so that's basically the agency carrying out the legislative intent, saying here's how you do whatever the legislation is. We also prescribe several forms, and our website is we have a lot of information. So if you suffer from insomnia, go to our website and I'll take care of it for you. There are two basic types of two general abatements. One on personal property equipment, personal property abatements, and that is, you can see a deduction granted by a designating body. The designating body can be a town council, county council, city council, whatever it may be for that jurisdiction, for the installation of qualifying equipment in an economic revitalization area. Then the other primary abatement is a real property abatement. And this again is granted by the designating body for the construction of a new or rehabilitation of a property in an ERA. It does not include the land. So if you have a taxpayer coming to you saying, hey, I want to get an abatement on a building we want to build, fine, but they would not get the abatement on the land. So what is eligible property for real property abatements? You can see it's construction of new structures, remodeling of or repairs of betterment of the property, if it increases the value of the property. And as you can see there that the abatement is based on what it will change in terms of the assessed value, not necessarily the actual cost. There is a vacant building abatement. As you can see, it's zoned for commercial and industrial uses, and it must be unoccupied for at least 1 year, and again, it does not include the land. So what is an ERA? An ERA is an area that is within the corporate limits of a city, town, or county that has become undesirable for or impossible for of normal development and occupancy. Who makes that determination? Could I go and say all of Boone County is an ERA? Sure. Could I say the town of Zionsville is an ERA? Sure. It's up to the designating body to say, hey, this is an area that we feel we need to be able to offer incentives to taxpayers to come and bring, either establish a new business, or if it's an existing business, maybe invest more in that by giving a personal property abatement, whatever it may be. If the ownership transfers, the designation transfers with the property owner to the new owner. So as I mentioned, a designating body can be city, town, county council. If you're in Marion County, you would fit the consolidated city definition. So what happens if you're a county council person and you have a town council or a city council, and they deny an abatement? Can the county council override that decision? No. It's up to each county, or each designating body. As far as personal property abatements, as you can see, there's 4 types of property that are considered: manufacturing, R&D, IT, and logistical distribution equipment. How many people do we have from rural agricultural based? Pretty good number of people, not surprising. Can a farmer be considered a manufacturer? Maybe. And the reason I say, most of the time you think, well, what's he manufacturing? Well, he may be eligible because if he uses equipment in the process of taking something from one to another, from one point to another point, he may be a manufacturer. I'll skip through this. So in this case, what if you had a farmer that had dairy cows, produces the milk, and in the process at his farm, at his location, he turns around and converts that milk into butter, ice cream, or something like that. Think of like Fair Oaks Farms up in the northwest part of the state. So it is possible that a farmer could potentially be a manufacturer, even though you don't think of a farmer as a manufacturer. So qualified machinery and equipment is basically property that begins with the material handling equipment. So if we think of a farmer starting with the milk, and it ends with the end product, the ice cream. But most of the time you're thinking more of the manufacturing side of things. You have something that begins as a raw material and it ends up with a finished product. So in this case, the example is a crane that lifts the coil of steel to the press. It stamps out a car fender, and ultimately then, by the time the process is done in the manufacturing setting, you have a finished product. What about pollution control equipment? Is it considered? No, because it's exempt every year. Office equipment, we'll touch on this in a little bit, but office equipment typically is not considered abatable equipment. Same way with semi-tractors and trailers, it's subject to excise tax. So what are the steps in establishing an ERA? It starts with taking basically a map of your area, in this case a county, and saying what part of the county is an ERA. Coming up with you have to prepare a preliminary resolution saying we declare that this part of, pick your favorite 92 counties, this part of the county we just declare is in a state that we need to establish an ERA for it. And of course, you have to go through the publication and adoption of the resolution. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not familiar with the SB one, but can the council request or require that the jobs that are generated be with people that live in the county? We have, most of our people drive in. For new businesses, they drive in from other counties, so we'd be giving an abatement, and we would not be receiving the benefit of the income tax.
The answer is yes. And the reason I say yes is because it comes back to local control. And if your council says, hey, we want to give an abatement because we, even though these people are driving in from out of our jurisdiction, we want to have those jobs because hopefully they're going to be spending money on their way in, buying gas or eating at local restaurants or doing whatever, or maybe they decide to relocate here. On the other hand, you could say, nope, we want our people to be homegrown. We want them to be, it's your jurisdiction, your decision. So it's up to you, local control, if you want to establish an ERA and give an abatement to a company and say, in order to get this abatement, all the workers have to live here. In this day and age of the economy, with people, moving freely, throughout the county, throughout the state, you may want to think about that carefully because you may be limiting potential growth. But if you decided we want to make it a stipulation that in order to get the abatement, X% of the employees must live in the county, you can do that. That would be up to your control. So a designating body can establish your own, or you could have a taxpayer come to you and say, hey, we want to relocate our manufacturing facility to your county, and in order to do that, we need a little bit of help. And so they come to you and say, can we set up a designating body, or set up an ERA for this location? Sure. But there are some strings attached if it's done by the taxpayer versus done by the designating body. And we'll get in, you can see through here, the property owner has to fill out the SB1, the Statement of Benefits form. Yes, sir.
Can the statement of benefits show that that the benefit is just maintaining the current employment? And that's legit also, that there would be no additional employment? That it's just a matter of...
Sure. And certainly in some abatements, there are clawback provisions. I've heard them called crawlback or clawback, but I've called it clawback provisions where you say, if you do not meet these certain goals or these, if you say you're going to maintain employment, fine. Or if you say we're going to hire 10 new people or 100 new people or whatever the case may be, there are some situations where you can put a clawback saying, if you do not meet these targets or you do not hold up your end of the bargain, we're going to come back and say, sorry, give us the money back that we gave you. But if you want to have a provision in your abatement saying, thou shalt maintain X number of employees, that's your prerogative as a designating body. Again, it's abatement, abatements are local control issues. I'm not sitting in the ivory tower over near the State House saying, oh, sorry, you can't do this one, you can't do that one. We're just saying, here are the rules, you decide how you're going to play within the rules. Any other questions so far? Okay. Like I said, I'm trying to rush through this so we can leave time for questions. The form should be incorporated into the designation process. And it's basically stating, here's what you're going to do. And the reason why the SB1 PP is for personal property is important is it sets the parameters. It's saying, here's how many jobs are going to be created or maintained. Here's how much the salary is going to be, or here's how much the company is going to invest in new property in terms of their investment. The taxpayer for a personal property abatement is filing this with their personal property return. The personal property return is filed January 1st is the assessment date, and they're filing it by May 15th each year. So you can see, here's what some of the things that be included in terms of the FTEs, minimum wages, investments. With the abatement, the deduction should say, here's how much the deduction is going to be. So if it's a 10-year abatement, say the first year it's 100%, the second year it's 90%, the third year 80%. It doesn't have to be 10 years, it could be 5 years, it could be 2 years, and we'll talk in a minute, it could be up to 20 years. So in 2015, the General Assembly said, you know what, we want to try and entice or have additional abatement opportunities for designating bodies and for taxpayers. So they've now approved or said you can, as a designating body, give up to a 20-year abatement on property. But there are things that go along with that 20 years. First, it removed the provision about the office equipment. So I mentioned before, typically or previously, office equipment was not eligible for an abatement. Under this new provision, it is. It would need to qualify for those 4 areas we talked about. But one of the key things here, if you're giving a 20-year abatement, is after the 10th year of that abatement, you must have an annual review. So yeah, you can give a 20-year abatement, but after year 10, you have to revisit it every year.
Quick question. I noticed that is exception allowed for new equipment. And jumping back to your example, say a headquarters moves someplace and asks for abatement. The used equipment they're bringing into the new county,
Is that property new to Indiana? Is that property new to the jurisdiction? It may or may not be. It depends on the situation. And that's where it gets into a case-by-case situation. So, you know, if you have a firm from a company moving from Chicago over to Hammond or Crown Point, and they're bringing their desks and their chairs and office equipment or their machinery that they've had for 5 or 10 years, and they've had it on their books for 5 or 10 years, but is that equipment new to Indiana? If it's coming from out of state, yes, it would be. Even though it's 5 years old, it's new to Indiana.
so how about new to the county? It's not new to Indiana.
That's where it gets, that's a fine line of do you or don't you. Local control, I mean, depends on what type of abatement. Is it just on personal property equipment? Is it, you know, tied in with the real property abatement? You know, what's the situation? So it's going to be fact or case sensitive. As you can see, you know, this bottom line is minutes to a council meeting do not qualify as a resolution. So you have to take deliberate action, pass a resolution. You just can't say, well, in our meeting on Monday, you know, December 10th, we decided, we talked about it, and we passed the resolution. Okay, fine and dandy, but you have to have something in writing where all the members sign off and say we either voted for it or against it. What was their vote?
And don't you have to have a public hearing on that?
You have to have a public hearing, please. You know, heard all the stories about, well, we had a backroom deal and all this other stuff. Please have a public meeting where it's advertised, open door law, everybody gets the opportunity to speak.
We had one of these recently in our county. It was a 300-acre tract, and our Economic Development Corporation wanted to, our local county, our county just wanted to do this with 300 acres. There was some pre-existing residents within that 300 acres. Do you have a feel for whether that would, how that would affect their property values?
So the question is, how would a 300 tract of land where you have existing homes, how would bringing in new development affect that development or affect those homes, so those property owners, those existing homes? It really depends on the situation. I mean, are you bringing in, depending on the type of manufacturing facility, you know, are you bringing in something where they're, you know, handling hazardous waste? Are you bringing in something where it's desirable, you know, maybe it's, trying to think of an example. maybe you're creating a plant that people want to go, and maybe it's green, green building and economically, or ecologically friendly.
We don't know ahead of time, like this 300-acre
That's-
tract
that's-
is they were making that the ERA, but we don't know yet what's gonna come in here.
That's the $64,000 question, is what's the impact gonna be on the taxpayers? And some taxpayers may say, not in my backyard, and they may fight you on bringing in a new facility. Others may say, yeah, bring it on, because all I see is corn and soybeans, and I'm tired of looking at corn and soybeans. So it really depends on the situation, what the impact may be. It may be
Just
beneficial,
kinda
yeah.
overall feel,
It
like general
may be beneficial, it may be detrimental.
I have a question. Do abatements have to be, once you've gone through this whole process, do they have to be renewed yearly, or, like, how does that
If
work?
you have a real property abatement, it's good for however long that time frame is. So if it's a 5-year abatement, they only have to go through the abatement process once. If you have a personal property abatement, then that's where it gets into the taxpayer filing their personal property return each year. So it really depends on the type of abatement. And they still have to, you still have to go through the process, but the question is, in terms of reporting or following up, how much do you have to do? It's real estate, real property abatements, it's once and you're done, whereas personal property, it's gonna be every year just to make sure they're filing their personal property return, filing their abatement papers. And I'm only halfway through.
When you look at abatements such as will create 10 jobs, this certain project will create 10, 200 jobs, and then certain reporting aspects of that, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, make sure they're on track. Is that
Mhm.
part of the abatement?
Sure. I mean, and I think a lot of designating bodies will put in, we want to have, we want to see the proof in the pudding. We want to see you report to us, here's what we've done. If you're saying you're going to invest $10 million in new property, new equipment, show us your personal property return. Show us where you're increasing, your assessment, you've invested. If it's a real property abatement, show us show us the project, what progress have you made. Obviously, if you're building a new factory and they haven't broken ground in 2 years, they're not doing their thing. But in terms of employment, yeah, you can make it a condition if you want to. It's your call. Trying to get through all these slides because I'm running out of time real quick. Like I said, a 3-hour presentation in 30 minutes. Can an abatement be approved in a TIF district? Yes. But there's a few things that go along with that. A designating body may impose a fee, a filing fee, but you can see there at the bottom, the fee is based on a percentage not to exceed 15% of the tax savings, and it's used to promote the economic development. Tax caps, that's one of the things you'll hear a lot about, are tax caps. Is it possible that the tax cap could override the tax abatement? And the answer is yes, and you can see the explanation. There are certain facilities that are not authorized to receive a real property deduction. So if you have any massage parlors in your jurisdiction, sorry, they're out of luck. Residential facilities may not be approved unless it's a multifamily property, of which at least 20% of the units are for low income or moderate income individuals, or it's a distressed area. So the filing requirements, talked about the personal property return. The abatement calendar, talked about the May 15th date. The assessor has certain timeframes in which they review the personal property returns. For real property, it's filed by May 10th. Form 11 is a notice of assessment, and so the assessing official should be sending out a notice of assessment to the taxpayer saying, as of January 1st, here's what your assessed value is, and it would show what last year's assessed value was. As you can see, this Indiana code provision, the assessor shall examine, not may, shall examine the personal property returns. The assessor may approve, deny, or alter the amount of deduction, but they have to give the taxpayer notification. Some of the information may be confidential, so if you were to call the assessor's office and say, hey, what's the assessed value for Eli Lilly? The assessor can tell you what the assessed value is, but they couldn't tell you how they got to that assessed value for that property. So what happens when problems come up? Well, in one situation, not frequently, but sometimes you'll have a situation where the taxpayer doesn't do their personal property work on time. And they come to you and say, hey, Mary, the bookkeeper, was in the hospital and we didn't get our paperwork filed on time. Is there any way we can get the abatement? Possibly. They could either say, yeah, we'll skip year one and just go with it year two, or, and this happens a lot, the taxpayer could come to you as a designating body and say, could you give us a waiver? Could you sort of slap us on the wrist and say, don't do it again, but grant us a waiver so we do get our abatement? Sure. But again, a public meeting, and the designating body says, we'll waive that non-compliance for that partial year, for that year. As you can see, there are several reasons why there may be non-compliance. I talked about the main differences between real property and personal property. Real property, the assessment is set by the assessing official. Personal property, it's a self-assessment process. Taxpayer does have appeal rights. Here's my contact information. Email is usually the best way to get a hold of me, but I did want to at least allow a couple minutes for questions. Sir.
Just trying to get clarification on that ANTA on the personal property deduction. Is the 20 years the trigger to be able to remove that forklift, or you can just do that enhancement on any?
You can for the 20-year, you can remove, it's after the 10-year. So the 10-year must be the forklift, you know, with the all within. But if it goes beyond 10 years, goes to 20, 15, whatever, that's when that provision is removed.
So is the first 10 years still, the forklift is still in place? It's after the 10 years?
That's my understanding, yes. Other questions? Yes?
Clearly, you have experience with these things over time. Do you all keep track of any local experience of tax abatements and real impact as models for us to look at and learn from? And in particular, do you have an example of one of these that's really disadvantageous to the county that allowed it to occur?
Unfortunately, we do not have that specific model to say here's a example of a great abatement that worked and here's how it happened. What we do have is each year the auditor must report on our gateway system, and you can access gateway through our website. They must each year by December 31st publish a list of all the abatements that they approved for that, say, calendar year 2018, plus list all the outstanding abatements that are in existence. So there is some information in terms of what some abatements are out there, but in terms of your question, hey, show us a model, give us a real life example of this company did great and brought in everything and they met it, and give us an example of where it went south and they didn't meet it and we had the clawback provisions and all that other stuff.